I want to ask you a question, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people this week. You know, we've been in a series all summer long about the signs of Jesus in the Gospel of John, and I've heard from a lot of people how much they like this, but I've been seeing Jesus differently through these passages. I don't know if you have too. The conversations that I've been having with people is they're like, this is just different. I've never thought about this before. I've never realized this. And I always tell people that, reading scripture is like an onion. It makes you cry. No. But there's layers to it. And I don't know how many times I have been, I've read the Gospel of John. I've been in full-time ministry for 10 years. I was reading the Bible pretty seriously 5 years before that. Took a class on John in seminary. I think I read the thing in one sitting like 20 times. I've read this book a bunch, and I've never seen it like I've seen it in this series. And I think what has been jumping out to me so much is that I feel like we've been seeing the humanity of Jesus. We've been seeing the person of Jesus in this. We've been seeing what is it like when Jesus gets frustrated? What is it like when Jesus gets happy? What is it like when Jesus is compassionate? What is it like when Jesus just wants to get away from people? We did that for a couple of weeks. What is it like when Jesus sees people and he feels sorrow, or he sees people and he feels excited? I feel like we've just been seeing a side of him that, for me, I've never really thought about that much before. And what's been going on is we're seeing the humanity of Jesus and the divinity of Jesus. And while he's 100% of both at the same time, fully God, fully man, the church has believed that for 2,000 years, we've been seeing him dance around these stories of life and need. And today we're going to read a story of the sixth sign, the second to last sign. We find it in John chapter 9, and we see Jesus is expanding some things out. Let's open our Bibles. It'll be on the screen behind me. You can use your phone if you want to. But John chapter 9, we're going to start in verse 1. This is what the scripture tells us. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or the sins of his parents? It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned to us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I'm here in the world, I am the light of the world. And then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, spread the mud over the blind man's eyes, and he told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. So these signs of Jesus, these visible inbreakings of the divinity of God, just breaking into our human existence. We've talked about how these are not miracles for miracles' sakes, but this is what happens when the power and the presence of God comes into our world, and how it resets things, and how it makes the world operate differently because Jesus is there and the power of God is there. When we read this second sign, it takes up the whole chapter of 9. It's a fantastic way to spend the afternoon if you want to read this whole story. But what we find is, if this is a dance of Jesus, that right here, the dance is in the steps, it's in the details, and just things, there are subtle things that are going on that make this so much more than a story about one person, and make this a story about all of us. See, Jesus says that he's been sent. And from that point, we can begin reading that this is so much bigger than just this one story. See, this healing right here, this idea of sin, the disciples immediately get into it. They're asking Jesus, well, is this guy blind because he sinned, or is this guy blind because his parents sinned? And while we might kind of look at that and think, well, oh my goodness, what are we going to do with that? The disciples are simply working off something in the Old Testament, where God says that he will make the parents pay for the sins of the people pay for the sins of the previous generations. And because of parents' sins, the generation and the offspring will be under this burden. But what God is talking about in these people, these disciples, you've heard the phrase, you have their blinders on. You're getting just too internally focused on yourself. The bigger story that's going on here is God had said these things hundreds of years beforehand about the covenant that he had made with his entire people. About what happens when entire nations break the covenant. And we see this cycle worked out in the Old Testament, where the nation of Israel split into two and was overtaken by foreign armies and was hauled off, and where Jerusalem's destroyed, and they go spend time in exile, and they come back from exile, and they build the temple, and then they try to fix things and turn things around, and then a couple hundred years later, Jesus comes. The disciples are trying to find, why is the reason that this guy is hurt? What did he do to get himself into this position? But Jesus realizes his power can have very different outcomes in this moment. That Jesus makes sure that his disciples know that this healing is much bigger than what they're going to expect. This healing does not just involve a blind person. That Jesus' words in the story are significantly bigger than one person. In fact, at the end of chapter 9, it wraps up in verse 39. It says this: Jesus told him, I enter this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show that those who think they see, that they are blind. Disciples wanted to find out what that person had done that was worse than them. And Jesus turns it and flips it over around. And Jesus talks about sin here, and Jesus talks about suffering. The disciples were trying to get Jesus involved in a petty religious debate. They're trying to figure out, well, who is at fault here? They're thinking about the individual. They're focused on the individual. But as far as sin goes, Jesus was refusing to name a culprit here. When he saw this man, he did not see a culprit. He saw a person that's in need of healing. Talk about the humanity. How many times have you gotten yourself into a pickle and you've immediately begun running through thinking, what did I do to cause this to myself? How is this an outcome? Why am I such a bad person that this happens? Like we get in these situations, we're in need of healing, and the danger is that we can easily become self-judgmental and self-referencing and start beating ourselves up. Jesus is not naming a culprit here. He's naming himself as a solution. That suffering only exists because sin exists. That if we want to imagine a world without sin, we have to imagine a world without suffering. Jesus is asking his disciples to have a bigger picture of what sin actually is. That this isn't just a list of do's and don'ts that we learned when we were a kid to threaten us. But instead, Jesus is naming, these are the things that will kill us. And I've come to make sure that you don't get hurt anymore. That sin is not something that we're not supposed to do because someone tells us, but sin is something that we are to avoid and stay away from at all costs, because it's the exact opposite of what a healthy life and what a healthy relationship and what a healthy being is. Suffering happens because sin happens. And Jesus says, I'm coming here to fix the sin problem. And suffering is going to be fixed as a result of that. That Jesus is greater than all suffering in this world because he attacks it in solidarity with our salvation. He comes and says, why was he fully God, fully man? Why did Jesus have to come to this world? Why did Jesus have to do all the things that Jesus did? He said, I'm going to come here and stand here with you to go through every single thing that you're going to have to go through, and I'm going to break this cycle for you. And by me, and because of me, and through me, we're going to break this destructive pattern of what's been going on. But this dance is in the details. There's one thing that Jesus says that helps us realize this is much bigger than us. In 9:4, he says something that might not initially make sense to us. He says, we must quickly carry out the tasks assigned us by the one who sent us. Now, in my reading, the way I would read this, after reading this whole story quickly thinking, I would think that this would read that I must carry out the tasks assigned by the one who sent me. We're used to Jesus talking about himself. So here we have a man in need of healing. The disciples are judging him, trying to figure out what did he do that was so bad that got him into this position. And Jesus saying that's completely different. But we have things that we need to do because we have been sent. I would expect this to be Jesus' problem. Jesus says, no, this is all of our mission, though. This is a plural statement here, that we are part of what Jesus is supposed to be doing here. That's a little different than what I would natively think. I don't feel like I'm qualified or I have that level of responsibility or I would know what to do in that situation. I wonder if the disciples were kind of getting freaked out by then too, or maybe they've just seen him do so much stuff they were just rolling with it. We must do the things by the one who has sent us. That we're part of this. To be sent is to be dispatched for a purpose. If you're sent to do something, especially in a relationship with another person, that there's a couple of different folks involved. Like, yeah, there's you that's doing the task, but there's also your relationship and your responsibility to the person who sent you. And then there's the whole task thing. This is not something that just one person can do. And Jesus is here saying that my Father has sent me to help you do this. That we're called to be part of this process of sending. And that detail here, so think about this. So Jesus is in Jerusalem. And he's there for a feast, and it's called the Feast of the Tabernacles. This is most of the time when I hear feast, I would want to be involved in said feast, right? It's like Turkey Leg Day. So I don't think you would like this feast, the Feast of Tabernacles. Well, you might, but not in July in Monroe. So the Feast of Tabernacles is when everyone, to remember the Exodus, builds like a sketchy little lean-to outside of their house, and they live in it for a few weeks. Like, do you want to live outside right now? Like, I remember I spent a summer at Boy Scout camp, like in a screen door house, and that was miserable enough. So during the Feast of the Tabernacles, though, they go and they draw water out of this pool at Siloam, and they carry the water to the temple and they pour it out. This is part of the prophecy in Ezekiel, to where it says that one day that the river of life will flow from the temple. So they go there and they grab this water and they pour it out, and it's from a very specific place, and they pour it out in a specific place to envision this future where God's providence and God's peace and God's goodness and God's justice, everything that he has promised, when it flows like streams of living water. But this pool is interesting too, though. So I don't know how many also y'all are excited. I had an interesting weekend. I told somebody setting up this morning, I said, man, no matter what, there are three things I'm counting on right now. Jesus is big enough, barbecue is good, and Game of Thrones comes on tonight. Okay? We're all familiar. We can think of an analogy. We know what a siege is, right? Okay? Like we've seen enough movies. The idea of, okay, big army comes and circles the castle, keeps everything from coming in and coming out. Like, if you live back in like pre-gunpowder days, I've been listening to a podcast about the fall of Rome. If you live back in the days before gunpowder, the absolute worst thing that could happen to you, or the best position you could put yourself in militarily, is that a word? Was to go under siege. And that King Hezekiah in the Old Testament, who was one of the last good kings, one of the last godly kings, one of the last true kings, he realized that the king of Babylon was going to come and lay siege to Jerusalem, and that bad things would happen. And the greatest fear in a siege is having your water supply getting cut off. And so what he realized they could do is they could divert this stream, they could make it run underground. They're going to build a tunnel and send this stream completely from outside of the city gates, under the walls, through the mountain, and have it come out in Jerusalem. And no matter what, no matter who put them under siege, they would have a clean water supply. And that Hezekiah's tunnel, it's what it's called. You can read about it in the Bible, or you can go to Jerusalem and see it. You can crawl through it if you want to crawl through it. I don't want to crawl through it. I'm not a person made for small, tight spaces. But this pool emerged at Siloam. So think about it, this water that's been sent, and that's what Siloam means, sent, because it was sent from outside, it was sent from on high to where it goes underneath, to where you can't see it, to where you're not aware of it. And then it emerges to provide sustenance and healing and every single thing that we're going to need. It's the story of God sending Jesus. He's sending him to us, and we encounter him and experience him in ways that we cannot understand. Sometimes the best way to describe grace is, I really needed it. I don't know where it came from, but all of a sudden every single thing I needed was right there for me. It was sent to me. And as marvelous as that sending is, we are part of this, of being sent, just like Jesus is. How amazing is that? Just think about that Jesus did not want to do this on his own. That Jesus, because of the relationship that's just inherent in God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that Jesus perhaps, think about this, he could not do it on his own because he refused to not involve us in this process. As messed up and as janky as we can all get, he said, I'm not going to do it without them. The last thing, kind of weird thing, the whole mud and spit business. Does this freak anybody else out? Is this gross? Can I tell you my favorite spit story? When I was in kindergarten, Jenny Williams fell down on the parking lot, on the playground. And man, she was crying, kindergartners. And I decided that I was gonna help fix Jenny Williams. She had a bobo on her knee. And I'd seen something on a movie recently that I figured would be the best way to fix Jenny Williams. Let me show you what it was. I'll let you name the movie. Took my hands and I went, pff, pff. And I put them on her knee. I was going to Mr. Miyagi, Jenny Williams' Wii. Well, Mr. Boone, the principal, found out that Chad Brooks spit on Jenny Williams. And I got drug into the principal's office, 5 years old. Now, this is 1985 in Rapides Parish. What do you think Mr. Boone did? He got that big paddle, what he had drilled out 2 1/4 holes on the drill press for greater airflow. And oh man, I got 3 licks because I tried to Mr. Miyagi heal Jenny Williams. Nobody wants to get spit on, even if it's well-meaning. So Jesus spits on the ground and makes mud out of it and puts it on this guy's eye. St. Irenaeus, he led the church roughly about 100 years after Jesus' death. This is what St. Irenaeus had to say about this. He said, if we think about the story of God, our mind in this story should instantly go back to Genesis, to God forming man out of the dust in the ground, out of mud, and breathing his life into us. That Jesus in this action is showing us that through his sentness and through our participation with his sentness, that he is resetting the cycle of Genesis. Jesus coming saying, I am pushing reset on everything. It's like when the old school 8-bit NES, that reset button was powerful. He's saying, I'm hitting reset on this whole endeavor. And because I'm here, it's going to be very, very different. But for us to grasp what this reset means, what this salvation means that Jesus offers to us, we have to grasp what it means to be sent, because they're one and the same. We can't have one without the other. The disciples were focused on their individual faith, and sometimes we get focused on our individual faith. And the problem when we become too individual and too internal focused is we forget that a key part of the whole program and plan is that we are sent. That our faith and our salvation is not even worth it if we don't understand that we've been sent, that we've been called, that we've been given the ability to do even greater things than what Jesus has done. The disciples wanted to point out what was wrong with one person. Jesus refuses to take a position. When it comes to you and I, Jesus refuses to take a position. Instead, Jesus sees through that position. He sees through and gives us and infuses us with what we were made to be and what we were called to be, our own unique place in this whole mission. That think about this, our problem is our own invitation to be part of this, the greatest rescue mission on earth. So we have to ask ourselves the question, where do we get past ourselves? Where do we get done with pointing out ourselves as the blind person who has sinned or whose parents have sinned? Do we point out our problems and think that those will roadblock us to our potential? We disciple ourselves. Second thing is we realize, how does Jesus need to put mud and spit in our eyes? As gross as that sounds, every one of y'all need to get spit on. I need a lot of spit. I need a lot. Because I want Jesus to hit that reset button completely. And I want to be able to live into that and know what that means, see that, and work inside of that. And each of us need to be praying for what that sending looks like. Where's that pool that we need to wash at? What is that washing then going to send us off to do? How's that washing going to help us find that thing that we've been chasing and trying to understand our entire life, and we've been looking for in many different places? And we might even know it in the back of our mind what that is. We might be avoiding it. We might be saying that we don't have the ability or the power to do that. It might scare us too much. But Jesus has sent us. And as part of his mission, that you're uniquely called to be.